Wonderful, thank you. Well, thank you those of you who are staying around. That's really good to see people here. Next, my pleasure next is to introduce a young lady, Jess Stirling Yeatman, who is going to tell us about the lived experience. So she's going to tell us about her life as a daughter in a military family and learning how to support and incorporate PTSD into the everyday life of a family. Now, I've had conversations with Jess online, and I think this is going to be a fascinating chat and very insightful. So without bigging her up too much and not putting too much pressure on her. But thank you, Jess, and over to you.
Thank you, Kevin, for your introduction there. Now, at the side there, trying to just slightly adjust my mic, completely dropped my papers, and about 10 minutes ago took the staple out of them because I thought it's going to be much easier to just make sure that I can put them all together. Yes, Jasmine, if that's okay to have another copy, that would be fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, I'm not going to beat around the bush here, and I'm going to get straight to the point. Being the child of a veteran is the most rewarding, yet challenging frustration I believe I will ever experience in my lifetime. My name is Jessica, but feel free to call me Jess, Jessica, anything will do. I'm 22 years old and live in the east of England in Suffolk. Just while that goes on. Thank you. So apparently Kevin's introduction wasn't enough, and if you didn't know already, my talk was about to begin. So I'm 22 years old and live in the east of England in Suffolk. Now, I don't have a military background myself. I've actually been employed by a shipping company for over 4 years, carrying out various different roles. Most recently, I'm an inside sales executive, handling predominantly import shipments to the UK and across various regions in Europe. Now, as per the Health and Social Act passed in 2012, NHS England and clinical commissioning groups, also known as CCGs, must involve the public in commissioning arrangements. Now, saying this out loud, you probably think, I have no idea what that means. Is it a big deal? Now, it is absolutely fantastic because the health service must be able to engage more with the public, with patients, carers, citizens, in order to listen to our needs and give feedback on things that need to improve and things that need to be added. Now, this act has actually given me the opportunity to be present here speaking today after I joined the Patient and Public Voice Group in December 2020. Now, I'm the daughter of a veteran who served in the Royal Military Police. Now, every time I ever say that out loud, the first thought is, oh. And that is fine. You can think that. Many do. And he spent the vast majority of his time serving in Germany, Hong Kong, and in Northern Ireland. Now, over 30 years after his service, in 2017, Dad was diagnosed with severe complex PTSD. Now, when someone said that to me, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I had no idea what that meant at all. I'd heard of PTSD, but never really in any great depth, let alone when severe and complex are being added to the discussions. Now, for those that don't know, PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a mental health condition that may occur when someone has witnessed or experienced a traumatic event. Now, the main difference between normal PTSD and complex PTSD is that PTSD generally relates to a single event, where it may be multiple events, but over a short period of time, whereas complex PTSD relates to a series of multiple events that occurred over an extended period of time. Now, this is caused by long-lasting trauma. Although the diagnosis stereotypically has its roots in combat, the medical community has since recognized that PTSD can affect civilians and soldiers alike, and no matter the severity or the individual, living with PTSD as an undiagnosed, debilitating mental illness can be crippling to an individual. However, when someone told me back in 2017 that my dad had severe complex PTSD, the worst thought of it was that I had no idea how much it would impact me or how much it would terrorize our family unit. PTSD doesn't just affect one person, it affects everyone around you. Now, research has actually shown that children who experience early childhood trauma, abuse, or neglect are actually more likely to develop profound and long-lasting mental health conditions such as PTSD. Now, this is where the very start of my dad's diagnosis begins. Now, after being diagnosed with tuberculosis, also known as TB, when he was a small child, he spent a sufficient amount of time in hospital away from his family. Now, this isn't really normal for any child, really. You might go into hospital, but you come out the same day. You might stay overnight. But this wasn't the biggest impact of his childhood trauma. In the later stages of his adolescence, his family moved away to New Zealand, taking his younger sister with them and leaving him here. While he remained in the UK, he was at a suitable age where he could be independent, but nonetheless, still a child. Now, he lived with a friend's family temporarily before he enlisted into the military. Now, studies have shown that children who experience trauma in childhood can actually be more likely to then enroll into the military in order for a sense of family, sense of belonging. When Dad and I used to talk about his military service, I always thought it's because he wanted to. He wanted to join, that's always what he wanted to do. Not, in fact, that he was unconsciously in search of a sense of belonging and a sense of family. And there'll be many of you sat here today that all have your personal reasons why you joined. Some completely different than others, some quite similar. But often, a lot of the time, it is for that search of family. But nonetheless, Dad had regained his family unit, a place where he could turn and someone was there, a place where someone thought the same as you, acted the same as you. However, in a world filled by so many, you were still taught that on the outside, you were the only ones that you could trust. After Dad's service came the hardest part of all. It was the transition to civilian life, which many of you will know very well. A phase which our military are often just expected to naturally transition back into. From a regimented, structured routine, where everyone thinks and works alike, to a world where no one thinks like you. Slowly adjusting to Civvy Street, he joined the police force, where he remained for 16 years, until he was mentally discharged after struggling with his mental health. Now, the prognosis for this was that he was suffering from stress and anxiety. And it was a sign-off letter that was issued a little too quickly without enough investigation or support along the way. Now, struggling with your mental health is incredibly difficult. However, struggling with your mental health in a world where discussing the matter is seen as a failure or too taboo to discuss is another story. Regardless, however, of the demons he was facing internally, Dad maintained his role as the man of the family, supporting his wife and his young children, who were none the wiser of actually how much suffering was being done in silence and that his military service was far from behind him. Now, for many of us sat here today, and actually discussed earlier on, I believe, when Justin Havens had his chat, the term fight or flight might ring a bell to some people. Now, the amygdala, which is part of the limbic system in the brain, is the brain's smoke detector. So any time that this smoke detector feels under threat or in fear or in danger, the brainstem reacts instinctively to get the term fight or flight. However, if you've been in a world where you've been trained to automatically jump to a specific of the two, it's very likely that no matter what the situation is, you will automatically go to that response. On top of this, when affected by mental health conditions, such as PTSD, the amygdala becomes hyperactive. Those who suffer from emotional trauma will often exhibit more fear of stresses experienced. Whilst the amygdala becomes hyperactive, however, the prefrontal cortex, which is located in the frontal lobe of the brain, becomes hypoactive. Now, this therefore means that the prefrontal cortex's role of rationally reacting to emotion now struggles to do so as it may have once done. Also located in the limbic system is the hippocampus, which can be largely affected by emotional trauma. The hippocampus is responsible for storing and retrieving memories, whilst also differentiating between past and present. When affected by emotional trauma, this results in difficulty recalling some memories. However, some can be extremely vivid. Now, you may have an experience that even the smallest response can trigger some emotion. And actually, those affected by emotional trauma, it's actually found that the volume of this part of the brain can actually be smaller, so it can be difficult to dictate between past and present. So, in other words, when you experience this feeling again, actually you still feel like you're in the moment when it may have been years ago. When I was younger, I never really noticed that Dad was regimented, or that he would fly off the handle, or that he was abnormally disconnected and withdrawn. I just thought that's how dads were. He was strict, yes. Annoyingly anal with timekeeping, yes. A big yes on that one. But someone I could turn to no matter what. Someone who could make everything feel better when I didn't think it could be. Someone whose hand I could reach to when I needed to feel safe. However, over time, that hand started to get more cracks on, and it started to get harder to reach and further to recognize. Now, amongst the struggles of his mental well-being that were definitely kept under wraps came alongside the battle of his physical health. 2006 was the year that we noticed something was wrong. What started off as nausea and headaches developed into dizziness and loss of balance. I have vivid memories of him walking around, stumbling, trying to stay upright as if he were drunk. He also became forgetful and suffered from memory loss. With multiple visits to the doctor, their prognosis was viral vertigo, but he knew it was something more, and you had to keep digging. It wasn't until he forgot my mum's birthday, which a family friend actually turned around and said, "Is he okay?" Because he'd never forget something like that. He annoyingly remembered everything to the T, and especially when it came to his wife. But she was the person that knew him most, better than he knew himself sometimes. And she marched down to the surgery. She's from Glasgow, by the way, so she marched and she meant business. And she demanded that a doctor came down to our house to take a look at him. In October 2006, he was diagnosed with a brain tumour after being falsely diagnosed by 4 doctors and rushed straight to Addenbrooke's Hospital. Driving the car right behind him was Mum. Meanwhile, his 6-year-old twins at the time had just finished their day at school and had no idea on how their life was going to change. We were picked up by a family friend and neighbour who we lived with for almost 2 months, and they became our secondary family, the substitute family that my dad had once gone in search of. He underwent emergency surgery to have the brain tumour removed, which lasted 8 hours due to complications. The way he was lying on the table, his lungs collapsed and he stopped breathing completely. However, he was stabilised and the tumour removed. He began his recovery, receiving love and support with his scar on the back of his head, which allowed people to recognise his physical trauma. Which, just listening to that last line there, think about the fact of the physical scar and the physical trauma, as opposed to perhaps the emotional trauma he was enduring. Reunited after weeks apart, Dad began to rebuild his strength. Overseeing the mental impact his family had endured, they stood by him and resumed as normal. However, soon readmitted, with an infection in his cerebrospinal fluid, his twins encountered coming home again to find that their dad was gone. In 2012, it became a bit of a pattern, and we came home again to find that Dad was once more gone. Diagnosed with diverticulitis, he underwent surgery to remove part of his bowel. After complications incurred, he had to be fitted with an ileostomy, which was required, and he remained in hospital for multiple weeks. Now, for those that don't know what an ileostomy is, it's essentially a bag that's strapped to your stomach, and it deals with the bowel process. And for anyone, it's nothing to be ashamed of, but especially when you are the man of the family who has undergone all of his military service. It's humiliating. It feels shameful, even though it shouldn't. However, the world that we're living in, it's not considered normal, so therefore it must be weird. Over the years, so diagnosed with diverticulitis, he had the ileostomy, and he remained in hospital for multiple weeks. We did come to visit him that time, and I tell you what, visiting him then was like I'd never seen him before. He was pale, exhausted, and in pain. It's the most vulnerable I'd ever seen him. And it was the first time I actually thought to myself that he might die. I had genuine fear, and There was nothing we could do about it, but just hope that he was okay and support him and tell him that when he comes home, we'll do this. And that's what we had to do as the role of his family. Slowly, though, he did recover and he built back up. And with the support of his family, he had another scar to add to the collection, which my add is growing quite big. But little did anyone realize how many invisible scars were bound tightly shut for us all. Over the years of putting our family from test to test, more cracks started to emerge and relationships began to break down. Our family unit became disconnected and dysfunctional. Dad became resentful and negative, filled with anger which continually grew regarding medical failings both physically and mentally. With a mum who was trying to keep the peace and keep the family afloat, a dad who no longer saw the good in anything and had lost hope in everything, and a brother who was acting out and in trouble all of the time, I vowed to myself that I would never, ever add to the stresses and tackle every and any issue on my own. I vowed to see the positive in everyone and everything, no matter what. Years went by, and our family could not have been more broken. I no longer recognized the man that I called Dad. He had hit rock bottom, and we were sinking with him. This is when we decided to seek help. Taking us back to 2017, he reached out to the Royal British Legion, who referred him down to combat stress. From there, he underwent a 2-week assessment down in Leatherhead and was diagnosed with severe complex PTSD. Now, I heard a statement once that stuck with me. It claimed that for the first call for help fades courage. Now, I don't know if I necessarily believe this statement. In a world still full of such shame regarding mental health, particularly men's mental health, I truly believe that this is when you're at your most courageous. To admit that you are not okay requires strength, often strength that we do not feel we have when we are feeling at our lowest and most vulnerable. Post-diagnosis, and Dad was finally able to obtain the support he so rightfully deserved. With another 6 weeks away from his family down in Leatherhead at combat stress, he took part in intensive psychological therapy, surrounded by other veterans battling similar wounds. Unfortunately, however, not everyone has the knowledge of these resources and are not provided with the opportunity to obtain support that they so desperately need. Upon his return home, he seemed like a fixed man, so optimistic and genuinely happy, a phase that I hadn't seen him in for so long. I didn't recognize the man that had come home. A month went by, and I thought I'd heard the last of the word PTSD and thought it was gone from our lives forever. But it really was too good to be true. With no further support or check-ins from combat stress, the cracks started to emerge again. All of the anger, resentment, and negativity came flooding back. He was living in a house where he felt no one understood him, and no one knew what he was going through, and that everyone was against him. Our entire life began to revolve around PTSD. It started to become an excuse rather than a reason. Dad became unknowingly self-indulged and wasn't remotely interested in anything unless it was military-related or a civvy failure that he could thrive on. For decades, these psychological war wounds had been hidden away and locked tightly in a box. Pandora's box had now been opened, with all the taunting emotions and memories unleashed. He claimed to his family that he had nothing positive in his life. That in itself broke me. The family that had been stood there thick and thin, he had no positive thing to get him up in the morning. This all unraveled during my A-levels, and it's not actually until I look back that I realized how much I was affected by secondhand PTSD. Now, this isn't something that ever really gets talked about, but I couldn't pretend that everything was okay. I felt emotionally and physically exhausted. I was unfocused. I felt depressed. I would come home from school and isolate myself and sleep for hours on end. I'd have panic attacks, randomly, out in public, at home, and feel physically sick because I was living in a world anymore that I couldn't keep up with. I wanted to hide away. I couldn't bear to hear that word any longer. Our whole family had reached breaking point and needed help. Dad had officially reached crisis when we decided to call the 24/7 Combat Stress Crisis Helpline. We got the voicemail and were forwarded over to the answer machine. We called this 24/7 helpline on the Friday evening, and no one rang us back until the Monday. This cannot happen. Living with someone with complex PTSD is not an easy task. You never know 1 minute to the next when they're going to flip, when something might trigger them. However, A weekend is a long time when a family member is in crisis and you cannot obtain any military-trained support as to how you can help them. When you search on the internet regarding help and support families that are supporting loved ones with a military background can get, it is honestly like trying to find a needle in a haystack. To this day, I don't actually have a full idea on the entirety of the resources I can get. I didn't know you could. Sometimes I wish someone would just turn around and give me a manual all about PTSD, step by step, but that's not the case. My mum is the glue that keeps our family going though. She is the strongest, most selfless person I know, and the reason we're all together today. However, in the process of doing so, she has completely lost her identity. She has put everyone else before herself for so long that she has lost who she is as an individual. These are the people that don't get enough recognition for all they do. Instead, they get forgotten about. But they deserve just as much support, regardless of the military background. And she didn't even know she could have it, or that actually she was entitled to it. After reaching out to Help for Heroes, my parents were though offered separate therapy sessions at Gervais House in Colchester. This is where Help for Heroes operate the majority of their recovery services for the military. The complex, ironically though, which is under a mile away from Merville Barracks, and actually every veteran I've ever spoken to there has no idea about what it is, where it is, or actually the services that are on offer. They were both guaranteed a full number of sessions with the confirmation that they would never suddenly be dropped, because this was Dad's biggest thing, being dropped, the feeling of abandonment, the feeling of being let down. This is all I could ever want for. They'd finally got the help that they deserved. Until 3/4 of the way through the sessions, and Dad was informed that him and another individual had to be dropped, and their sessions would no longer be resumed. And do you know, I say that all this out loud, and you think, you're joking. How can this keep going on? What's next? But they did. The sessions ended, but that wasn't solely the issue. It was a guarantee that they would promise him that they would support him, and that he would never be let down. Once again, he relived those feelings he hated so much and had hidden away for years. Every time an individual opens up about their mental health conditions, they're building it with someone new. The trust is yet to begin. They are starting from scratch. You know nothing about one another, and you have to get to know that person before you open up fully. Some may never open up fully. Each time, though, wounds are ripped open, and the emotional trauma is often re-experienced. In the last couple of years, I too was offered emotional support, which for a long time I was always so determined that I didn't need, that I wasn't the one with PTSD. And in fact, when I'd mentioned about the troubles that I faced with the mental health before, I was told, not by professionals, when in a dark place, I was told that I wouldn't understand and that I didn't know what anyone was going through because I myself didn't have PTSD. But I realized I was in denial and I did need the help. So when the opportunity arose, I decided to reach out. We met up in a familiar place to me one day after work, which I attended, and I opened up completely. And we agreed that we'd start regular sessions. So when the first session occurred, and I turned up, and I waited, and no one turned up. And not turning up to a session, it's not the end of the world. However, when you've been sat on something for so long and finally open up, it's the feeling of let down. I felt humiliated, and I didn't know why. But it was because for so long I hadn't thought about these emotions, and I'd finally reached out to someone, and I experienced the same feelings that he did. Now, it wasn't until Dad was actually offered a sailing course down in Plymouth that, in usual military fashion, he was on time, which meant at least 5 to 10 minutes early, nothing later. So he sat down and he began to read the Civvy Street magazine. This is where he came across TILS, which stands for Veterans Mental Health Transition, Intervention and Liaison Service. Catchy, I know. So he received weekly sessions from them since the last 2 years, he's been under the Complex Treatment Service, also known as CTS. Now, he has carried out the majority of these sessions virtually due to the pandemic. However, a couple of them have been in person. Gradually, however, now, he is transitioning over from CTS to Rock to Recovery, who are a slightly less intensive service who coach and motivate veterans and their families towards a more positive future. I won't lie to you. Our family is still broken, beyond belief. Some days are much worse than others, but things take time to mend and rebuild. They'll never be exactly the same, but we'll get there. Everyone always asks me why I or my family hadn't walked away. The simple answer is, though, that we don't want to. Yes, everything we go through on a day-to-day basis is hell. Every day I wake up and I never know what I'm going to go through, or how the mood's going to be today, or what triggers they'll be endured. But here's my family. He is part of our family, and even though he's not exactly the same man that we used to know, he is still that man. And I see glimmers of that man that I know, and that's enough. Every day since the age of 6 years old, my worst fear has been coming home to find that he has gone forever. Regardless of what has happened in the past, it is about how we move forwards, and we will stand by him no matter what. No individual will ever truly understand what it's like to be a veteran with a mental health condition, serving or not. However, no veteran with a mental health condition will ever truly understand what it's like to be a family member or loved one on the receiving end. To see him here today, a man who's had to rebuild his life, to learn how to be a husband, a dad, a civilian, a human again, whilst trying to find his identity, is a courage that none of us can comprehend. I'm proud to say that I'm a daughter of a man who fought for his queen and country. However, I'm most proud that I am just his daughter, his Pip, someone that I could turn to in any hour of need, and someone who is more than his military service. Our lives could be very different without our troops. However, we must remember that theirs could be very different without us, and they need our support. Supporting and discussing mental health is definitely a work in progress, with resources that need to be made more widely available and shared, along with proper education for all. However, for the leaps and bounds we have come regarding mental health as a whole in the last 20 years is truly incredible. Today I was prepared to come here and tell you my story of battling PTSD, my survival story, if you like, until I realized that you cannot battle it. People used to ask me if he was better, or when he'd be better, or when PTSD would go away. Now, there are debates on whether or not psychological disorders or conditions or illnesses can be treated. And I believe that some do, but at the same time, I'm not trained in this, and I'm only seeing it from a lived experience. And at the moment, it feels as if that Dad will always have a form of PTSD. Maybe not as severe, maybe not as complex, and we have gone in leaps and bounds to what we were originally. But this is solely my lived experience story. And instead, it's not battling against the PTSD. It's not battling against the bad days. It's learning to support and incorporate PTSD into everyday life, one step at a time. Thank you for listening. Now, should anyone have any questions at all, please do come and speak to me. Whether you have a question or not, whether you just want to speak about things, hear more about my story, tell me a little bit more about yours. You will be able to either find me around here or in the Human Library, or I will actually be on the panel later on today during the Q&A.
Are there any immediate questions for Jess? No? Oh, hang on, lady over here. Hang on, microphone's coming. Hold.
Was it on? I think you're very brave speaking out. And I think it's something that everybody can listen to really easily to listen to you. And even if it's not about PTSD, I think most people in this room would have had some kind of trauma that they can relate it to. So thank you very much. It was really interesting. Thank you.
You're very welcome. I think coming here today, when I first got asked about speaking at the event, I was honoured to be asked. But at the same time, I thought, why am I being asked? Why does anyone want to hear this story? And that's the thing, that you always hear things from a professional perspective, or someone who's a doctor or knows exactly all of the facts and all of the knowledge that they can tell you. However, hearing things from a lived experience side is just completely different. And that's sometimes something we forget, that no matter what we're going through, the ones supporting us are also going through something. And it's something that we can relate to. No matter if that's military or not, I doubt that there is one person here today that actually hasn't gone through something before where they've needed the support of something else or someone else. So I think that's really important that we share and we actually make sure that people are aware of the facilities and the resources that are on offer. So thank you.